Hello, 7th graders, and welcome to another fascinating flipped lecture brought to you by one of your fabulous history teachers. Today we're going to look at another civil rights movement that began in the 1960s, the women's liberation movement.
Let's start with the definition of women's liberation. Women's liberation is a movement to combat discrimination and to gain full legal, economic, vocational, educational, and social rights and opportunities for women, equal to those of men.
Let's review a little of the struggle for women's rights. Women have traditionally been expected to listen to their husbands and to stay home and care for the kids. In 1920, that began to change when the 19th Amendment was passed and women were finally granted the right to vote. However, not a whole lot changed, as many women still voted with what their husbands and fathers did, and the women's movement basically stalled. Women's rights and equality began to take a turn for the better during World War II, when women began working outside the home for the first time in large numbers. Women began to realize that they could work and have a family as well. They experienced new economic opportunities, they contributed to the war effort, and they felt useful. This was a big boon for women's rights. However, women's rights took a turn for the worse in the 1950s, which became known as the domestic decade. Women returned to their traditional wars after the war was over. There was pressure to go back home and to give jobs to returning servicemen. Some women were fired if they refused to leave. There was societal pressure through media, etc., to stay at home and be the perfect wife and mother. The few women who did work outside of home worked in low-paying clerical and service jobs that were considered traditional women's work. Therefore, most of the gains made during World War II were lost. The following primary source is an example of how much society put pressure on women to be the perfect wife and mother during the 1950s.